one more time, boys.
It's now or never. Verwoerd en Stefendas. Wie op gestiek. Sy eie van diek. Wie om gegraven. Sy eie soldaten. It's now or never. Verwoerd en Stefendas.
Hierdie was Dr. Verwoerd se persoonlike wapen wat hy by hom gehad het. Daar is 'n foto van Dr. Verwoerd. En dan hierdie is die vuurwapen van David Pratt. Wat ook probeer het om Dr. Verwoerd te vermoor.
Can I say something?
En dan hier het ons die dolk waarmee Stefendas Dr. Verwoerd vermoor het. Daar kan jy sien is nog steeds van die bloedspatsels op die dolk.
Because Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd was an immoral man, I decided to stab him, and I killed him.
The whole population of South Africa has been shocked to the depth of its soul by the tragedy that unfolded itself in the House of Assembly this afternoon. It is my sad duty to express on behalf of all the tremendous sense of loss which overwhelms us all on this tragic day. A cedar of the Lebanon has fallen. The man whose master hand safely steered our ship of state for the past 8 years is no more.
Strangely enough, nobody spoke about him at all for years. I mean, until it was all resuscitated by the appearance of the Conservative Party, who then used to talk in glowing terms about Verwoerd and how South Africa would have been, you know, so much better a place if Verwoerd had been still the Prime Minister. The rest of us, I think, were only too glad to forget he ever existed.
You were in the House Assembly the day Hendrik Verwoerd was stabbed. Tell me about it.
Yes. I remember it in some detail because when it happened, I think I went into a kind of state of shock and I went on to automatic pilot. And I wrote down, I looked at the clock on the other end of the chamber and I wrote down 2:10, you know, 2:11 and exactly what was happening. When I came to, I had a page of a notebook full of a blow-by-blow account. My first memory is of this burly messenger bustling up the floor of the house from the entrance, the lobby entrance. And, you know, I thought it odd because they normally walk around in a very decorous way and almost invisible messengers during the proceedings of the house.
Dit is baie grillerig om daaraan te vat. Maar daar is dit. Jy kan sien daar is ook nog van die bloedkolle aan die baadjie.
Suddenly this messenger loomed above Dr. Verwoerd and whipped out a knife and began stabbing him. I just saw the knife flailing away, you know. I don't know how many times it was, but it was more than once. And the reaction of people in the house was terribly interesting to watch. I, as I say, was on kind of automatic pilot in a state of shock, as if I was watching a cowboy movie.
Hier is ook die broek, soos jy kan sien, hy was nogal 'n bietjie groter persoon gewees. Soos die bloedspatsels, wat nog steeds aan die broek is.
I noticed P.W. Botha ran across the other side of the house as poor old Dr. Verwoerd was bleeding to death. And he started haranguing Helen Suzman.
While this crowd was still round his bench, P.W. Botha, who was then the Minister of Defence, came hurtling down the aisle of Parliament, waving his arms, stopped in front of me, shoved that famous finger in my face and said, "Now we'll get you, it's you Liberals, you did this," and stormed out again. Of course, I was quite astonished at this outburst from him.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Liza Key. You have asked me to appear before you in connection with the case of Dimitri Stefendas, a parliamentary messenger who assassinated the Prime Minister of South Africa in 1966. Stefendas is still alive, but his doctors at Sterkfontein Hospital have judged him not well enough to attend these proceedings. I've spent many hours with Stefendas and feel that there are aspects of his story that should be brought to the attention of the Commission.
I don't remember much. I do remember that I stabbed him and that the blade, the dagger, had a kind of anti-rust solution on it. And I did not take it off when I stabbed Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd. I stabbed.
He bought from us a sheath knife similar to this in a metal sheath, though. It was the German youth knife, which is a normal sheath knife, which you can use for all types of all purposes. And the one he bought from Rawbones was known as the Black Forest. It was a double-edged knife like this, similar to this, but it had it was silver. It was an aluminium handle and a silver blade. They made them in black and silver, but I believe the one that he bought was a silver one. And this is a terrible weapon. This is the one that he actually used to assassinate the Prime Minister with.
Dr. Verwoerd died when the doctors tried to put the dagger out. It was stuck. You understand? The solution stuck onto the flesh. And when they tried to pull him out, it caused a bigger wound, and it killed him.
He seemed to be agitated, but what impressed me was instead of picking up the knife like normally a person would hold it like that, he picked up the knife and he held it in his hand like this. And I then stepped back from the face of the counter. I was a bit worried because I was all alone, and I noticed that he was sort of scruffy looking. It was his clothes weren't clean. They hadn't been to the laundry or cleaners, and he had a white sort of jacket on, linen jacket, and grey trousers, and an open neck white shirt.
They took me down and held me. 3 people on one side and 3 on the other, and they dragged me. They were dragging me out towards the entrance. Then Verkeer, one of the men, big men that was there, came there and asked him, "What is this commotion all about?" And they answered him, "He has just stabbed the minister." So he turned around and he broke my nose. He punched me, and as I fell back, and I took those men that were holding me to the ground. 3 on one side and 3 on the other. They all fell down because they would not let me go.
When we heard the news on the radio, everybody was surprised, everybody was shocked, some was happy. That's all.
And you?
Well, we always take the middle road, you know. We take the middle road. He got what he deserved. He got what was coming to him. This guy used the blade, you understand? So everything went down softly, no bangs. Today we hear bangs. That day it was soft.
You had to go and identify him. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Can
I
you tell me
do.
about that?
I don't remember much about it, but I remember I did have to go to an ID parade, and there were, I can't remember, 4 or 5 people standing there, and I immediately, I saw him there. I mean, when I saw his picture in the paper, it was the same thing. I mean, I knew it was Stefendas, Dimitri. There was no arguments about it. He has a look about him.
When they opened the cell door, I saw a bundle in the corner. It was an individual. It looked like a hobo. The bundle then bestirred itself, and he got up, and I spoke to him, told me his name. I then told him that, I explained to him that the Judge President had appointed me to act for him pro Deo. Stefendas said that according to his tenets of his religion, he didn't need legal defense. I explained to him that it was in his interest not to be undefended. It was in his interest to have a proper legal defense. And it was then that he said, well, I don't know why the good Lord should have chose such an infirm person like me.
Okay. Mr. Stefendas, can we start this interview with you telling us about...
Speak slowly.
About Mozambique?
Where was I born?
Tell us where you were born. Yeah.
I was born in Lorenzo Marques, the capital of the province of Mozambique, on the 14th of January, 1918. My mother was a mixed woman. I never saw my mother. Often. I never saw my mother. She died when I was a baby.
Mr. Chairman, as you are no doubt aware, the Supreme Court found Stefendas unfit to stand trial and committed him as a state president's patient, despite the fact he had not been convicted of any crime.
But what I remember of that hearing was Judge Bayers, who was a very colourful man, very flamboyant really, and he said in his summing up, I could no more hang this man than I could hang a dog, he said. This man is a furiosus, which I went and looked up. It's a Roman Dutch term for a lunatic or a madman.
Bayers was as racist as the ordinary man in the street. But Bayers was able to rise above his racist feelings. He was interested to get to know Stefendas and to understand what had prompted him to stab the Prime Minister Verwoerd in the House of Assembly.
You see, what Stefendas' motive was that we, the victims of District 6, were not interested. He may have had a different motive for putting his operation into action. You see, it is like when we are in South Africa and we heard Bafana score a goal in France, we felt happy. You understand? So somebody else did the job for us to make us feel happy.
I do think this assassination of Verwoerd changed the history, the course of history in South Africa, because nobody was as sure as he was of the policy of separate development and Bantustans and so on. I mean, he was steeped in it. It was a religion to him. But the others all had their doubts. I mean, there was no doubt Forster was determined to maintain white domination, but that was a different thing. It wasn't based on any philosophy. the way Verwoerd's was.
Some children in Middelburg were very jealous of me. The principal's son, Mr. Jack Cox, used to call me a half-caste. He used to bore me out and call me a half-caste. Miss Irene Walker was only the one woman that defended me. She turned around and said to me, "They are jealous of you. They are jealous." These brown people gave me an inferiority complex. I used to feel inferior before them.
It's difficult, you see, because I grew up with a denial, basically, of the role of Stefendas. I mean, to even shortly, even at the funeral, even a few days after the funeral, they would take the line that we shouldn't mourn in public. This was God's will. This man was not sane. It was not a political thing, and basically, you know, you don't talk about it. You know, when I thought of the possibility of, you know, say, meeting Stefendas, it made it more real, and I suddenly thought, okay, to actually meet this person and to think, but this is the person who killed your own grandfather. And then it's quite a difficult thing to accept. Yeah, then there's a sense of sadness and a sense of tragedy about this. The more you think about it, the more you explore the possibility that this wasn't just a tapeworm, this wasn't just a conspiracy, it was actually somebody who also responded to the kind of racial and injustices and dehumanization, and that he saw Dr. Verwoerd as the symbol of that. Then it becomes a real tragedy, you know.
The decision to imprison Stefendas rather than place him in a mental asylum is extremely unusual where a state president's patient is concerned. It was compounded by the fact that he was not placed in an ordinary prison, but what was effectively death row, and held there for nearly a quarter of a century.
Every Friday night, lying on our bunks, we could listen to Stefans off at one end of the prison doing his weekly nut, entertaining us with his songs, always starting with Sari Murray and then going on to Roll Down the Battle. He had a slightly hoarse, urgent voice. I could imagine him behind his bars, bellowing his songs to the empty passage, or maybe lifting his head to the high ceiling like a dog howling its primordial fears at the moon. He would be cheered wildly by everybody else in the prison. We were the world's most enthusiastic audience, and some aficionados would scream for an encore. But that was the extent of his contact with his fellow men.
It was very bad in prison because they used to hang people there next to my cell, half a dozen at a time. 6 people were hanged at one time. The warders, they used to take me into a disguised locker of clothing, and they used to put a straight jacket on me, and then they used to punch me, and until I fell unconscious on the floor.
They were really egging one another on to see who could be the most awful. The one was that some of them felt that they personally had to take it out on him for having killed Verwoerd. He had to be punished day after day. You know, you killed our leader, kind of thing. Although they themselves had obviously never known Verwoerd, and they were much too young to have been really concerned by this. But there was this kind of a revenge.
I was brought up believing, along with many other South Africans, that Stefendas was a madman who was ordered to kill the Prime Minister by a tapeworm which he believed lived in his stomach. I've discovered no evidence that Stefendas believed such a tapeworm ordered him to kill Dr. Verwoerd, despite attempts by his interrogators to elicit that response from him.
He was a fascinating man. I rather liked him. He's the sort of man that I happily would have enjoyed having a drink with in a pub. He was articulate, well-travelled, spoke about 10 or 12 different languages, and he had interesting tales to tell. However, after one had been talking to him for some 15 or 20 minutes, some very bizarre incidents were recalled by him, particularly involving his tapeworm. And of course, the moment he mentioned that he had a tapeworm that dictated to him and told him how to live his life, I had little doubt in my mind that the man was insane.
I really felt he was a normal, natural person, you know? That's how I felt about him all along. Even when they asked me whether I thought there was something in as far as the worm was concerned and so on. The only time that I had to mention the worm was when they asked us, Cooper and them asked us, did he ever mention, I said, the worm? Yes. He did mention the worm because of his voracious appetite. He would eat anything, man, and quantity. We've got his pan here in the kitchen still. He did a dozen eggs, you know, and so on. However, these gentlemen came and they told me, well, look, when you speak about him, just please mention the worm and the worm and the worm. They emphasized that.
Why was that?
They said, then we'll be able to get him free on that.
My colleagues and I thought it necessary that we should have him examined by a physician just to exclude the very, very remote possibility that there was a tapeworm. And after a full investigation, Dr. Muller came to the conclusion that there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever of a tapeworm. And of course that even if he did have a little tapeworm, there was no way that any tapeworm could convey messages to him.
I don't believe Stefendas is mad. I believe Stefendas invented his madness in the form of a tapeworm because it's something you can't prove. He'd been in 30 or 40 hospitals. He had been interviewed by so many psychiatrists, and he said, I learned very quickly which answer they wanted to fit into their category. They had already decided I was.
In his statement to the police, 6 days after the assassination, Stefendas said, I did not care about the consequence of what would happen to me afterwards. I was so disgusted with the racial policy that I went through with my plans to kill the Prime Minister. Shortly before the assassination, Stefendas, who was classified white, applied for reclassification as a coloured.
The only blonde girl I knew when I was a child, Sophie Noblinger in Lorenco. She appeared to be very beautiful, and when I got near her, I used to get an inferiority complex.
The white population consists of Dutch, English, German, Irish, Scottish, French.
Identity is something that is very, well, it's part of who you are.
Countries contributed to the population of South Africa, and the tribal dress of the women seems to be as variegated as that of the Bantu.
If it's in any way confused or mixed up, it can certainly put you way off balance.
I have never wanted to be coloured. On the contrary, I always wanted to be very higher, to the extent that I ended up in the North Pole, the Scandinavian country. I wanted to be blonde with blue eyes and all that.
The insight that he had also into his condition became very, very clear. He knew he had done something which had dramatic consequence to his victim. And I think he was grappling within himself to understand why he had done it. And obviously, having lived in a race-ridden society and being a highly intelligent person, It was a natural thing to come to the conclusion that he had been motivated by race discrimination.
There was a concern as to whether he was white or coloured, since he had no identity documents on him. If he were white, he would have to gather in services in white homes. On the contrary, if he were coloured, he would have to attend services with coloured. That upset him a bit. Then he was taken from the coloured meetings that he had been attending with us, and he was put into a white home in Pinelands. He attended meetings there for a while and things didn't go wrong. He was very frustrated regarding this racial tension wherever he went.
He didn't want an ID book because the ID book, according to the ID book, his racial classification would have had to be mentioned in the ID book. He said no, he wanted an open ID book.
In those days there was almost an obsession in the country with classifying people. And in the Cape that led to many tragedies because families would find one or two of their members classified the other way. And then to remain in the superior, as it was then, class, you had to avoid those members of the family because if you associated with them you could be reclassified. It was an awful situation.
They said the problem in this country is the white man doesn't understand the black man. And he drew a distinction between the black man and the coloured man. And he said as far as the coloured people are concerned, we must fuck them white. That was his solution.
And the black man?
The black man remained an insoluble problem as far as he was concerned. He didn't understand the black man, he didn't understand his language and background, and he didn't identify with the black man. Not that he was unsympathetic to the black man. He was at a loss. He didn't understand.
The hearings I covered were mainly between white and coloured borderline, you know, or no, it was also coloured and African borderline. And the coloured and African borderline people, they would ask them questions like this: do you have bricks under your bed? No. Apparently, this related to a tokelosh business. You've got to protect yourself from the tokelosh. Weird questions like that, you know, based on a very primitive anthropological knowledge. No, also the hair thing, the shape of your nose, the thickness or otherwise of your lips, all that kind of thing. But it was humiliating and demeaning.
The most wonderful thing about this Drakensberg country is the air. I just can't describe how utterly alive it makes you feel, or what it did to our appetites that day.
When I went to South Africa and started work as a reporter in 1960, it didn't take me long to realise that I suddenly acquired a light meter in my eyes, like a Leica camera. And I started looking at people and putting them in a racial slot, a category. Touch of the tar brush, coloured. Probably a black father and a white mother. Yeah, oh, he's black. Oh, he's a Zulu. Oh, he's Italian, but he could be coloured. I wonder if he's playing the colour line in it. Yeah, you develop light meters in your eyes, particularly if you're a reporter whose eyes should always be searching for information for your newspaper. Yes, what's wrong with that? I developed light meters in my eyes.
When I worked in Parliament, I think they classified me as a white because I was very light, my complexion, And because my English, my pronunciation was good, my perfect English.
I was working on the Citizen, which, as most people in South Africa know, was a front organisation for the government to disseminate propaganda. And the Observer in Britain ran this story saying Stefendas was badly treated, stooped, broken old man. And H.J. Vandenberg told me, would you like to go in and see Stefendas? So I said, yes, of course I will. Wouldn't I? The first reporter to ever interview Dimitri Stefendas, the assassin of Dr. Verwoerd, the first man ever to get into death row, journalist that is. So I was sent in to do a clean-up to prove that the Observer were telling lies. And I photographed him in his cell in death row, reading a book, cleaning his shoes. I took photographs of him in his private exercise yard. Stefendas was very acute. He spotted straight away that it was a South African intelligence front organisation. He spotted that.
Under those circumstances, one is extremely sensitive to the slightest change in regime. When you get your food late, when you get your food cold, when they come in and they tip over your bed, so you have to do it all over again. And they used to do things like that all the time to him. Throw out his food, throw it on the floor, walk in it, have him clean it up. Companions. And because of the fact that he could hold on to the belief of the justice of what he'd done, the one could transform that whole 27 years into a building block for what comes later on. The other one lives the shadow part of that same experience, deprived of all objectivity and deprived of any form of self-justification, as it were.
In a copy of an internal memorandum of the Mozambican Security Police, the following was recorded. Dimitri Stefendas, of mixed blood, was recently in the company of persons of the Negro race and was heard to say the following phrases of a subversive nature. This country is not called Portugal, it is called the United States of Mozambique. Its flag is of a blue color with a rainbow. That rainbow represents all the colors. Any day now, all this will come to an end, because what is necessary is not to be fooled into saying that we are Portuguese, because we are Africans. Long live our country, the United States of Mozambique. This is the Beplande beach.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yes, that is the beach. I used to work there as a barman. Is a basement on top. Oh.
I actually think I've got a picture here of that.
Yeah.
There we are. That's the hotel. Do you remember that?
Picture taken from above. We are not inferior. Our architects are good in Lorenco.
They're great. See, there's Lorenco, the city. Station.
The railway station. Very conservative architecture. Ik woonde een beetje minis, een beetje groen door de boer. Daar woont mijn saai, maar ik woonde een beetje minis, een beetje groen door de boer. Daar woont mijn saai. Bring mij terug bij jouw trouwsbaan. Daar waar mijn sari hoort. Daaronder in die wies met die grote remon. Daar voor mijn sari, maar